Real College, Oxford 13.ddhi India 28, Banayatola Lane, Calcutta 700009 First published 1926 Second edition, revised and reset, 1948 High edition. 1979, with a new appendix added by Sunkagosh R6000 Liumdid at Anu Press, 51, Yamapukar Lane, Calcutta JA 700009. The exchange of international thought is the only possible salvation of the world. Thomas Hardy. One may then laudably desire not to be counted a fool by wise men, nor a knave by good men, nor a fanatic by sober men. One may desire to show that the cause for which he has lived and laboured all the best years of his life is not so preposterous, intellectually and morally, as of late it has been made to appear by its noisier and more aggressive representatives. That he has never been duped by the sophistries and puerilities of its approved controversialists, but has rested on graver and worthier reasons, however ill-defined and edgy expressed, that even if his defense of it should have failed, he has not failed in courage or candour or sincerity. Nor has he ever wittingly lent himself to the defense of folly or imposture. George Tyrrell, through Scylla and Charybdis, 8th. Tyranny and Prasuntamahila Nobis kindest and most unselfish of friends. Courage, RNS and steadfast through the years. Loyal through all detract ions and anger. Preface. Oviedo 20 years ago, I published a short study, Rabindranath Tagore, then, in 1926, a quite different longer book, Tagore, Poet and Dramatist, both have long been out of print. It is the later book which is now brought up to date with the poet's death. A book, as someone has observed, never completely shakes off its first draft, and my own opinions and critical judgments have changed very greatly. But rewriting has been drastic. 11 some 35,000 words have been excised, and much added and changed, to make this in essentials a new examination, and a reasonably close representation of what I now feel. I have remembered always that Tagore, though his work, having to get past the concealment of an Indian language, came to judgment in the age of the First World War and of T.S. Eliot, as a writer was the contemporary of the later Tennyson and Browning and of Robert Bridges. In fairness, he must be judged as the Victorian poets are judged, whose world has passed away. Milton's English verse is less than 18,000 lines. Tagore's published verse and dramas amount to 150,000 lines or there are equivalent. His non-dramatic prose, novels, short stories, autobiography, criticism, essays of many kinds, is more than twice as much. APD there is also a mass of uncollected material. No apology for omissions. Paper stocks are rationed, and the poet's Bengali admirers, who may feel disappointment that favorite pieces are not mentioned, must accept my assurance that I have cut down ruthlessly from necessity. I have also cut out my bibliography. I think mine was the first, but a bibliography is of value chiefly to students of Bengali literature. I have only 350 titles, and an inclusive list is in process of compilation. My own work is nearly finished, and I am able to do, not what a younger man might do but only what is still possible. 8. Preface. We ourselves know little of India, while Indians know a great deal about us and even about our inmost thought. Of what we have hardly cared to know, yet which many are at last anxious to know, there is evidence enough if we take some trouble. Gandhi's uniquely frank revelation of his experiments with truth, Jawaharlal Nehru's autobiography, which carries the impress of his candour and integrity, and Tagore's writings and public activities. If we know these, we are not likely to be surprised by events as they presently unfold. Norway breaking from thy hand, Zero King, answered Aor Tumberskelv at the Battle of Stiklestad, when O_AF turned inquiringly at the snapping of his bowstring. After the lapse of a millennium, the world heard AC, found as full of meaning, from Singapore and Burma. There will be no restoration of the empire we have known. But there may well be a nobler and stronger reconstruction, with friendship and understanding, instead of dominion and subservience, as its solvents. The connection of Britain and India stretches over more than 3 centuries, and provides the common ground on which East and West can come into a civilized relationship. John Keats, said his brother George, was no more like Johnny Keats than he was like the Holy Ghost. When Tagore's first English book appeared, and was seen to be mystical and religious, expectation was Pleiad. Oriental literature was known to be like that. The West had made up its mind about the East, and a few stereotyped generalizations were applied to cover the most diverse facts. Tagore, however, was not in the least like what he was supposed to be. He wrote, with a skill and virtuosity hardly ever equaled, in a tongue which is among the half-dozen most expressive and beautiful languages in the world. And the circumstances of his life afforded him leisure and opportunity, as well as ability, to observe the world outside India. I hope that my reader will see that his work was varied and vigorous and held more than a soft wistful charm, deadened by repetition. I angle that his spirit was brave and independent. Preface 9. Finally, I have a debt to 3 persons, to Prasanthamahalanobis, F.R.S. The final authority on all Tagore's work. His help, in letters and discussions, was generous beyond my power to express, to Noel Carrington, who examined in detail my book's earliest draft, to its great gain, and to my wife. Oriel College, Oxford, March 3, 1946 et. Contents Book I. 1861 to 1886 Early Life and Poetry Chapter Prolegomena Early Days 3 Juvenilia 4 The Heart Wilderness 5 Emergence, Dramatic Beginning 6 Last Poems of Youth Page 320 27 35 42 52 Book 2. 1887 to 1897 The Shailyada and Sadhana Period 7 Maturity 8 Poem. On Social Problems 9 First Dramas of Maturity 10 Re-Idents at Shailyada 11 The Jihand Chatti 12 Last Dramatic Work of the Syedhani I Period 13 The Layat Rice Book M 1898 to 1905. Rest and Change 14 A Turning Back to the Pot, T Drama and Verse Narrative 15 New Mayayur. Religio Poetry 16 Santina C and Book 4. 1905 to 1919 The Oitangeli Periyo 65 75 87 95 104 116 130 147 173 1x7 17 Growing Symboli M New Dramas 203 18 The Second Emergence, Into World Reputation 220. L9 Phi 11 11 I. Nationafo M, and Internationalism 240 11 12 Contents List of Illustrations Book V 1919 to 1941. Internationalism Chapter 20 After the War 21 Last Year's 22 Epilogue Appendix. PAOB 259 273 292 A Rabindranath Knowledge of English Poetry 313 B Comparison of English and Bengali Books 317 C Thompson's Letters to Tagore, a few relevant extracts 318 List of illustrations Rabindranath Tagore at the age of 60 Santiniketan, M. Sylvain Levi Teaching Facsimile of the Poet's Writing, an unpublished frontispiece facing p. 266 Poem facing p. 267 Book I 1861 to 1886 Early Life and Poetry I Prolegomena The earliest Bengali literature takes us into a different world from the Hindu one of today. The Brahmanic influence was for centuries at a very low ebb, and Buddhism reigned. Though long since replaced by Hinduism, Buddhism has clung tenaciously to the mind of the people and its influence still works, out of sight yet hardly out of sight. Fragments from an extensive literature which was Buddhist and magical and popular in character survive, some of them recovered from Nepal by Pandit Hariprasad Sastri. These are tentatively ascribed to the 10th or 11th century. Almost as ancient are hymns discovered by Dr. Dewanesh Chandra Sen, which in language of the quaintest simplicity tell the adventures of their hero, the sun god, and express a wonder less imaginative but as real as that of the dawn hymns of the Rigveda. The sun rises how wonderfully colored. The sun rises the color of fire. The sun rises how wonderfully colored. The sun rises the color of blood. The sun rises how wonderfully colored. The sun rise. The color of Betelgeuse. We are taken a stage beyond these pious ejaculations by rhymed aphorisms ascribed to D.I.K. and Kanai, personages probably as historical as King Cole. These are the delight of the Bengali peasant today, and they are accepted as a guide by millions. The books serve as infallible agricultural manuals. 11.1d10 S. Chandra Sen, History of Bengali Language and Literature, p. 2. Ibid, pages 19 and 21. For Rabindranath Tagore, if rain falls at the end of spring, blessed land. Blessed king. Spring goes, the heat grows. Kanai says, sow paddy seeds in sun, but beetle shelter needs. About 1200 AO. The political control of Bengal passed out of the hands of the Sen dynasty. A well-known picture by Surendranath Ganguly once shows Lakshman Sen, the last independent king of Nagia, descending the G/Zt to his boat with the painful steps of decrepit age, as he fled before the Musulman invaders. With him went into exile, till another handful of invaders gradually brought it back, the nationality of Bengal. /N100 years of foreign rule began, and Bengali thought and literature suffered not only because the newcomers were alien in race and religion but still more because of the disintegration resulting from faction and warring courts and the existence of little semi-independent states such as Vishnupur. Bengal was far from the center of Musulman rule, and about 1340 its government became practically independent of Delhi, and continued so till 1576, when Akbar reconquered the Province. During these 200 years it was cut off from the life of the rest of India, and the people suffered from local oppressors whom its Musulman rulers were unable to control. The 17th century was a time of comparative prosperity. But the 18th was the period of the decay of the Mughal Empire and the Maratha raids. Till the British rule was established, there was rarely any strong unifying power, but a series of exacting disintegrating tyrannies, driving the people's life into corners and crannies. With no great pulse of national feeling throbbing and making the land proudly conscious that it was one, the village remained a unit. Life was narrowed in other ways than political. With the triumph of Hinduism over Buddhism, a process which was probably completed about the time of the Musulman invasion of 1199, caste hardened and women's lot became circumscribed. A Bengali artist who died in 1909, aged 24. Prolegomena Shjld veiled. Few countries produce so many poets and novelists as Bengal does. Yet, while the land and blood quicken imagination, for many centuries the life strangled it. The highest literature cannot live without a rich and varied community life. Bengal produced an abundance of folk poets. Produced, too, court poets, with gifts of diction and melody. The outward grace, the blossoming of style, was produced. But the tree did not come to fruit, for of a nation, as of an individual, it may be said that it can express itself well but has nothing to express. Nearly 200 years after the Musulman conquest of Bengal, Chandidas did for Bengali something of the service which Chaucer, his older contemporary, one did for English and Dante for Italian, that is, he gave it poetry which vindicated its claims against those of a supposedly more polished Angua. A Brahmin priest of a village shrine, he fell in love with a woman of the washerman caste. He used the legend of the love of Krishna and Radha as the cloak of a passion which society regarded as monstrous, and expressed his own ardor and suffering in a great number of songs. This is not the place to discuss their value, but the poet's genius and his sincerity and depth of feeling set them apart in Bengali Vaishnava literature. He is often particularly happy in his opening lines, which leap out vividly, a picture full of life and feeling. This true lyrist was the fountain of what soon became a muddy monotonous stream, with only occasional gleam and ripples. As Chaucer was followed by Lydgate, so Chandidas was followed and to some extent imitated by a younger contemporary, Vidyapati, who wrote in Maithili, dialect of Bihar. Vidyapati's songs have been naturalized in Bengal and more imitated than even Chandidas's. The Vaishnava tradition was revived a century later by poets who followed in the track of the great religious revival of Chaitanya, early 16th century, and there has never been a time when Vaishnava poem have not been produced in every village of Bengal. One Chandidas was born about 1380 A. D6 Rabindranath Tagore. Inevitably, out of such an enormous mass of verse some is good. Though to the Western reader it seems a never-pausing chatter about flutes and veils and dark blue garments and jingling, glitz. Musalman rule influenced Bengali literature, by encouraging translation of the Sanskrit epics, which translation the pundits held to be sacrilege. If a person hears the stories of the 18 Puranas or of the Ramayana recited in Bengali, he will be thrown into hell, says a Sanskrit couplet. Musalman rule was indirectly responsible, too, for the epic Chandi. Written towards the end of the 16th century by Mukundaram, a poor man who suffered from Musalman oppression and wrote out of his sense of outrage and helplessness. In the 18th century, the Rajas of Nadia drew to their court two renowned poets, Bharachandra Ray, who perfected the elaborate ingenious style, and Ramaprasad Sen, the greatest of all Bengali folk poets, whose Sakta songs are often of ineffable charm and pathos. But the close of the 18th century found poetry exhausted, with nothing to say and no new way of saying it. As the gap between the English Romantic poet I. N. Tennyson and Browning is bridged by Beddoe, so the far wider gap between the vernacular Bengali poet of the 18th century and those of the New English influence whom we shall either presently, I filled by the Kaviwal as poet fellows who went from place to place English or in parties and did the work of the old English miracle play and the modern Mu5 IC hall. At their frequent war, they were querulous and obscene, at their BT they continued the tradition of Chandidas and Ramprasad, Beddoes that of the Elizabethans and Shelley. Their critics and irked the work of Swarchandra Gupta and Ramnati Gupta also, contemporaries who were not Kavalalication It should be noted that, up to date, Bengali literature means poetry, for prose hardly existed. Secretary Bengali Religious Lyrics, by Edward Thompson and A.M. Spencer, Oxford University Press. Prolegomena 7. It was from the west that the new life came. In 1799, William Carey, Baptist missionary, settled at Sairumpu, 1. He found a welcome here, in Danish territory, at a time when missionary effort was excluded from districts under the East India Company's control. For over 40 years he labored to bring every kind of enlightenment, getting invaluable assistance from gifted colleagues. He introduced printing, and from the Sairumpu literature, chiefly translations and books which imparted information, modern Bengali prose began. But real literary achievement did not fall to Carey. What foreigners, and pundits working under clear direction, could hardly be expected to accomplish was achieved by a Bengali of genius, Ram Mohan Roy, who was born in 1774. He showed his individuality early. At the age of 16 he composed an essay against idolatry, which led to a coolness between me and immediate kindred. He traveled in India, turning home 4 years after writing this essay. Already a competent scholar in Sardot-s. Crit, Persian, and Arabic, and learned in Hinduja, religion ACD literature, he now added English, Greek, and Hebrew to his accomplishments, that he might read the Bible, and he made European acquaintances. He opposed idolatry and steel abuses, his attacks on widow burning being especially determined, and his attitude raised such a feeling against me that I was last deserted by every person except 2 or 3 Scotch friar.d.s, to whom and the nation to which they belong I will always feel grateful. In 1820 he published the Precepts of Jesus, the Guide to Peace and Happiness. He accepted Christ's pre-existence and super-angelic dignity, but not his divinity. A controversy followed between him Dr. Marshman of Sairumpu, and in 1829, the Unitarian Society of England reprinted his precepts, with his replies to Dr. Manhaman. The first and second and final appeals to the Christian public in defense won the Precepts of Jesus. He had already gathered a small band of Bengalis, theistically minded like himself, who held informal meetings, 1 He landed in Bengal 175 feet 4 inches, and for several years was an indigo planter. 8 Rabindranath Tagore, the nucleus of the Brahmo Samaj. In 1830 he visited England, apparently one of the first Hindus to do this. Here he impressed everyone, and made many friendships, and the Seal Tea Committee of the House of Commons examined him on Indian affairs. Lord William Bentinck had suppressed Sati the previous year, an action for which Ram Mohan Roy's denunciations had prepared the way, and though the latter hesitated as to its expediency, he supported Bentinck's action so effectively in England that the appeal against it was rejected. He died in Bristol on September 27, 1833. It is pleasant for an pound Englishman to remember that his latte days were surrounded by the most devoted care, everything that love could suggest being done to save his life. It is hard to speak soberly of Ram Mohan Roy. In the crowded years that followed on his death, his influence was present in every progressive movement, religious, political, social, or literary. His least claim to greatness is that he was the first writer of good Bengali prose. His Proe, 5-8 Rabindranath, 1's very lucid, especially when we consider what abstruse subjects he handled. Prose style was not formed, and he had to explain to his readers that the nominative precedes the verb, and so on. But in speaking of Ram Mohan Roy we forget his literary achievement. He stood alone, with the most homogeneous society ever known united against him. He broke the tradition of ages and crossed the black water. Throughout his search for God he remembered men, feeling for sorrows that were not high and laboring till gigantic evils were ended or at least exposed. After Ram Mohan Roy's death, the Brahmo Samaj was kept alive chiefly by the exertions of Rabindranath Tagore, the poet's grandfather. He, too, was one of the first Hindus to 6-it England, where he was greatly honored, as Prince Rabindranath Tagore. He left a tradition of magnificence, of wealth, and prodigal expenditure, and Mauli debts, which his son discharged. Conversation. Prolegomena 9-2 stream CF movement now flowed vigorously but diversely, yet throwing across connecting arms and from time to time converging, the religious and the literary. Neither can be an elect in our present study, though both can be indicated in outline only. The Hindu College, now the Presidency College, Calcutta, founded in 1816 by Ram Mohan Roy and David Hare, a watchmaker. In the decades preceding and following the Raja's death was the center of intellectual life. It found two remarkable teachers, Dr. Richardson and Henry Louis Vivian de Rocio. The latter was the son of a Portuguese in a good mercantile position, and an Indian mother. His life may be swiftly summed up. Born 10th August, 1809, he joined the staff of the Hindu College in November 1826, where he immediately became the martyr spirit. He / as attacked and forced to resign. He started a daily paper, the East Indian. He died of cholera, 23 December, 1831. Round him gathered a band of students among whom were found names destined to become distinguished in the next 20 years. They showed an emancipation of mind which often found expression in reckless wildness. They revelled in shocking the prejudices of the orthodox. They would throw beef bones into Hindu houses and openly buy from the Musulman bread seller, ARD. Go round shouting in at the doors of pundits and Brahmans, "We have eaten Musulman bread." A prominent member of the group, who in after years reverted to a rather conservative position, shocked society bv the public announcement of his intention to become a MO.L. M. A farce which he crowned by a mock ceremony of apostasy. These excesses cannot be charged to de Rocio's teaching or example. The new wine was heady and came in overabundant measure. His attitude was summed up in his noble defense when his enemies compelled his dismissal. Entrusted as I was for some time with the education of youths peculiarly circumstanced, was it for me to have made fempert and ignorant dogmatists by permitting them to know what could be said upon only one side of one? The title was given to F. Mohan Roy by the Mughal Emperor. 10 Rab. Ndra. Nath Tagore. Grave questions. I never teach such absurdity. His was a singularly sunny nature. No frown /er darkenily. High brow. No harsh or rude word ever escaped his lips. Thou llt manliness and virtue, and that his pupils should think for themselves. Groio's school cared nothing for nationally m. On the contrary, everything Indian was despised. The one fact to which they were a/k was that at last intellectual freedom had come, C0MPUEL with this, nothing else mattered. The Fram H reality PN, at a distance of 40 years, fired them. European literature inspired and taught them. Unfortunately, with emancipation of mind too often went faults not merely of manners, but of morality, which strengthened the Reci-INAG-1 them. But at first the Durosio group, the intellectual successors of Ram Mohan Roy, ruled in literature and journalism, howing great acti/ity in 5 Authiel reform. On the religious side, the stream of Ram Mohan Roy's influence ran in other channels. At first the Brahma Samaj was dormant. In 1845, Dr. Alexander Duff, who had founded what became later the Scottish Churches College, the beginnings of Miss One honorary educational work, startled him to Calcutta by a series of remarkable conversions. His converts were young men eminent not only for family, but, as their after career showed, for ability and character. One was Lal Bihari Dutt, who folk folks o Bengal and Brunga/Pma 11t life arc till read. Another was Kal1 Charan Banerjee, for many years Registrar CF Calcutta University or ITY, one of the founders of the Indian Natal, Nal Congra. And a Man University or Aliri, did. Some of the Grosio group, also, had won over from their Po 1T10N of extreme aculartism, to Christianity. In 1833, Kri Hanamohan Banerjee was baptized, Pa in O/R to Christianity from in attitude WLOE only contact W1T, one religion WA contempt for orthodox Hirndu 1 SM. One who a long life he of high country as a Christian minister. Revered for his character and his collar hip and his considerable literary gift. A greater accession, till WA, the greatest, poet Bengal had so far produced, known by his Christian prolegomena 11 LLFLME henceforth, Michael Madhusudanda Tagore. One Hinduism was alarmed, as Anglican England, a few years later, was alarmed by the secessions to Rome which followed in Newman's wake. The tide of conversion was stemmed by Rabindranath Tagore, the poet's father, son of Ram Mohan Roy's friend Dwarkanath Tagore. In his autobiography, 9 he tells of his alarm and anger. Wait a bit, I am going to put a stop to this. So saying, I was up. I immediately set Akshay Kumar Dutta's pen in motion, and a spirited article appeared in the Tatwabodhini Patrika. After that I went about in a carriage every day from morning till evening to all the leading and distinguished men in Calcutta, and entreated them to adopt measures by which Hindu children would no longer have to attend missionary schools and might be educated in schools of our own. They were all fired by my enthusiasm. In this glimpse of the father some of the famous son's traits show his eagerness, his gift for propaganda. Brahmo schools were started, and the Samaj was stirred into activity and reorganized. The next 20 years were the great years of the Brahmo Samaj. The chief thing to note about these years is the solidarity of Bengali intellectual life. Though the ways and attitude of what I have called the Durosio group repelled Rabindranath Tagore, and though his religious enthusiasm, especially his Hinduism, met with little sympathy from them, yet /7 the two schools there was friendly intercourse. From 1845 onwards the Durosio stream began to flow into the other. Nationalism awoke, and with it swelled the full tide of an enthusiastic intellectual life. During the 20 years following on Duff's sensational success, Bengal was filled with a pulsing, almost seething eagerness. It was into this ferment that Rabindranath Tagore was born, at the very center of its activities, on the crest of these energetic Rs. Rabindranath Tagore firmly established the Brahmo Samaj, and worked untiringly on its behalf. A theist of the most uncompromising sort, he with Tude idolatry Eve 1 in his own one he was baptized in L8I3. Michael, 1824-73, was not one of Duff's converts. English translation, pages 98-9. Rabindranath Tagore family, with ever-increasing oppos 1t1 on. In later years he grew more in general sympathy with orthodox Hinduism, withdrew from society and lived much in solitary meditation, receiving from his countrymen the title Maharshi, Great Rishi. 1. But, though frequent assertions to the contrary have been made, he never strayed from the Brahmo position as regards such a typically Hindu belief of 5 transmigration. My father never believed in that fairy tale, said his son. 11. He was staunch also as regards necessity for social reform. Rabindranath Tagore's religious conservatism influenced strongly all his sons, Rabindranath not least. Yet it is well to notice how much there was in the Maharshi's religion which wa5 a new interpretation of Hinduism. His thorough l. going theism, hating all idolatry and scorning to compromise with it or expel it away, one's like nothing before it. Many Hindu CPCC1 ally poets, have denounced idolatry. But this man ga/c his life to the firm establishment of a sattity whose basis is the fervid denial of it. Rabindranath's theism was of the same clear unequivocal kind. A few remarks on the relationship between Orthodox Hindu society and the Tagores will be in place here. The family are Piralai Brahm 111s, that ones, Outkatisi. As having supposedly eaten Ulamu almonds 111 a former d.e. No strictly orthodox Brahmin would either eat or intermarry with them. Thus, they ha/e no real place in the orthodox Brahmin organization. Apart from their great position as Zemtundars and leaders of culture, a friend und, from a strictly social point of view the Tagore would be looked down upon with a certain contempt as Piri/I. Sage. Confer at one on with Dr. J. N. Farquhar. Persian, per, a/I. A per is a saint, chief saint, he word is a somewhat sarka 11c1, hard to translate. The tension of the two chief communities in Bengal was a matter of quite recent times. Rabindranath was very proud of Islam's Kantun but one onto Indian culture, of which he confided it an integral part. And Ram Mohan Roy was willing to serve in England as the Mughal emperor's representative, and was much influenced by Muslim thought. Prolegomena. The irony of the situation is their outstanding influence despite this, in everything that matters. The family name is Banerjee, Bandopadhyaya. But Thakur, Lord, is a common mode of addressing Brahmans, and was used by the early British officials for any Brahmin in their service. Anglicized as Tagore, it was taken over by this great family as their surname. Though outcasts from orthodox Hinduism, within what we may style the Brahmo Samaj circle, which embraced many who were not members of the Samaj, they stood for all that had affinities with orthodox Hinduism. The family, except for the Maharshi's immediate circle, was much more orthodox in ceremonial than the advanced Brahmo groups. Readers of the Maharshi's autobiography will remember his stand against idolatry's ritual in his own family. In caste also, the Brahmo Tagores, one though not supporters of it, in practice adhered to it. The friend already quoted suggested to me that the difference is analogous to that between Anglican high and low. As regards religious principles, there is absolutely no difference between them and ourselves. I write as a member of the Sadharanjay Brahmo Samaj while monotheism is even now obnoxious to most of the orthodox Hindus. Adi Samaj is high, that is all, while we are low. The Maharshi's branch of the Tagores followed his lead st all idolatrous practices of any sort, and the poet, going farther, became an uncompromising foe to caste and to division between one Brahmo sect and another. In 1857 Keshavchandra Sen joined the Brahmo Samaj. His vigor and magnetic powers of persuasion made the Samaj a greater force than ever, the most dominating thing in Bengali thought for the next 15 years. Yet with his ministry. The seeds of schism, which have since brought forth so plentiful a crop, were sown. As is well known, his mind was deeply influenced by Christianity. The more conservative section murmured, and it was only the Maharshi's affection. One section of the Tagores are still Hindus. This paragraph does not include them. Common or Catholic. Primitive. 14. Rabindranath Tagore for his iconoclastic colleague that kept Keshav along in the parent society. Under the influence of Akshay Kumar Dutta, their most influential journalist, the other wing of the Samaj wa5 swinging to the extreme limit of Brahmo orthodoxy, where it became scarcely distinguishable from Hinduism. In 1866 Keshav's party seceded, and became the Bharatavarshia 1 Br-HMO Samaj, too later known as the Church of the New Disp 11 Sashio 11. The parent body taking the name of Adi Brahmo Samtujay. Keshav founded Sulabhai Tese Anti Ichdair, 9 the first popular newspaper in Bengali, thereby introducing cheap journalism into high land. Nevertheless, the bent of his mind was neither literary nor political. His direct influence on Rabindranath was not great, but L11's figure was so important during these formative years that his career cannot altogether be passed o/er. Without L1111 the poet MWT have been born into a poorer heritage of thought and emotion. The history of K-Hab's later year is well known, and doc not concern us. Some of the Duroshio group definitely joined the Brahmo Samaj. Others fell under the sway or positivist thought, //HWA influential in Bengal. But all remained on friendly terms // if the Brahmo leaders. About 1866, the character of the Brahmo Samaj's impact on Bengali life and thought began to change. At first it did not say, oh, me les, hud it became more general, tinging the thought of Hindus rather than attracting them to join the Samaj. Today, the Samaj's actual member-hip is very small. For many years, however, its three main Asiatai Pri and perhaps the most notable spectacle the world has seen since medieval times in Italy, of a constellation of ability, in many members brilliant to the point of genius, yet forming an eclectic withdrawn brightness. To the interested Englishman it sometimes seems as one f every name which counted in Bengal belonged to these tiny commune 111e. Yet the main life of Bengal, apart from art, swept by, scarcely influenced. India. There was later yet another secession, a third Brahmo Samaj. The Satyaran Bmo Samaj, which became much the largest body. Cheap news. Prolegomena 15. The period 1860 to 80 was one of expansion and feverish activity. It was the full tide of the Bengali Renaissance, standing in matters literary to the age of Ram Mohan Roy as our own age of Marlowe and the university Witsrud to the period of Sackville, Wyatt, and Surrey. Michael Dude, in his Tilottamasambhava, introduced blank verse and the success of his epic, the Meghalmad Bad Kavya, established it. It became the accepted medium for serious poetical drama, till prose superseded it. Michael also introduced the sonnet, an alien which made itself at home. It would be fanciful to find the fact that he was a Christian mirrored in his choice of a hero for his epic, whose hero is not Rama, though the story is taken from the Ramayana, but Meghnad, son of Rama's foe, the demon king Ravana. But his attitude is summed up in his own terse statement, in which we hear again the frank revolt of the Duroshio school, I hate Rama and his rabble. Ravana was a fine chap. Probably, since Milton was his model, he was remembering Satan, so often alleged to be the hero of Paradise Low, Though, as a jolly Christian youth, I don't care a pin's head for Hinduism, I love the grand mythology of our ancestors. It says Eat deal for the easygoing tolerance of Bengali opinion that a poet expressing such sentiments, and calming the pariah of Hindu mythology as his demigods, should have been taken into the hearts of his countrymen. Bengal has travelled far from the standpoint of the more orthodox South. LT has a good deal even of FRE thinking, using the word in its restricted vulgar sense, to signify thought which is definitely negative in its religious conclusions. Mike_Hell began with English verse, writing a long romance in th manner of Scott, the captive lady. This is fluent and worthless. But in the Megalmad Bad he was happily inspired to trust his native tongue. Milton was his master and he attained some of Milton's majesty and splendor, elaborate diction and noble metrical movement. Rabindranath, when aged 17, the young Apollo, cut the Megnad Bad though young, intolerably severe, 16 Rabindranath Tagore to pieces. Experience later showed him how H. Michael stands out above his contemporaries and successors, and for this criticism he was remorseful. Michael's diction was a sar/scritized one so remote from spoken Bengali as to be difficult for all but good scholars. He used it with the insight of genius and with such feeling for majestic words as Francis Thompson showed, but with none of a philology, t's exactness. He was nothing of a Bengali scholar, said Rabindranath once, when we were discussing the Megalmudbakla. He just got a dictionary and looked out all the sounding words. He had great power over words. But his style has not been repeated. Int Bengali. He keeps an almost unbounded popularity, and there can be very few PG Bengals thousandra of annual prize G1 Vings where a recitation from high-clucked poem is not on the program. When Michael was the Bengali Milton for it was the cu Tom to equate each writer of note with .o. Me English name Nabinchandra Sen, with his aristocratic clear-cut features and haughty air, W is the Byron. His ambitious temperament revealed itself in the subjects he chose. His Rafrataka, an epic 1120 books, aimed at throwing round the mythology of Hinduism, already deeply tinged with decay by contact with the modern spirit, the protecting shadow of imagination. He summoned up all the magnificence of ancient legend. A dim prehistoric vista, 100 surging peoples and mighty kingdoms, in that dim light, CLAH1NG and warring with one another like emblematic dragons and crocodiles and griffins on some Afric shore, a dark polytheistic creed and inhuman polytheistic ritus, the stewed Brahmin priest, fomenting it. Disunion by planting distinctions of caste, of creed, and of political government on the basis of VCD1C revelation, the lawless brutality of the tall blonde Aryan towards the primitive, lark-skinned scrub-nosed children of the soil, the Kshatriya star. Like a huge comet brandished in the political sky, casting a pale glimmer over the land, the wily Brahmin priest, Jelu of the Kshatriya ascendancy, entering into an unholy compact with the non-Aryan Naga and Dasya hordes, and adopting into the Hindu pantheon the Asuric gods, the latter. Prolegomena. 17 The trident-bearing Mahadya, with troops of demons fleeting at his beck, or that frenzied goddess of war, the hideous Kali, with her necklace of skulls, the non-Aryan Nagas and Dasyas crouching in the hilly jungles and dens like the fell beasts of prey, and in the foreground the figure of the half-divine legislator Krishna whom Vishnu, the Lord of the universe, guides through mysterious visions and phantasms. Thus Dr. Seal. Yet the same critic adds that, while the 10 best books of this colossal attempt deserve to live, Thl Ravataka, in 20 books, is a work which can arouse only indignation. We had almost said contempt, for who can read hooks like the 11th or the 18th without a gnashing of the teeth, or an instinctive curl of the lip? In Te revival of Hinduism, which came as a reaction from Western influence, Nabin Sen was prominent, the poet of the movement. In his Battle of Plassey he sought to arrest disintegration by appeal to patriotic emotion. Other poets were busy in Rabindranath's childhood. Hemchandra Banerjee ranks with Nabinchandra Sen, they are the 2 chief names of this movement, next to Michael. Hembabu introduced the patriotic note, possibly a greater political service than literary. His Song of India keeps popularity, and is no worse, as poetry, than Rule, Britannia. His epics have reputation, but I am assured that those who praise them most have read them last. His gods and demons are very often and very easily astonished, and are always roaring, and their chariots run through the sky. His vocabulary is very limited, everything is unparalleled. His description is overdone, and never gets forward, it keeps on turning back upon itself. Rabindranath, when I put this view of Hem's work before him, agreed with alacrity and asperity, and referred me to Beattie and Akenside for English parallels. Neither Hem nor Nobbin ever really touched Rabindranath, and they can therefore be crowded out in a racing survey of the influences that have formed the poet. More important to us is Biharalal Chakravarti, a nearly forgotten poet but a one new essays in criticism, pages 96-7. 218 Rabindranath Tagore True 1. Rabindranath has told one how Biharelal's simple music attracted him, when in his teens. If this chapter aimed at giving a complete survey of all Bengali literary effort, it would contain considerable mention of Akshay Kumar Dutta's prose woe, k. Long a model of style, and a far more extended notice of that of Isvarchandra Vidyasagar, who took up Bengali prose from the Ha1ds of Ram Mohan Roy. Vidyasagar translated, and wrote didactic and moral tragedies, in a sober adequate style. His courage and honesty, his learning and generosity, gave him almost a dictatorship in letters. Then Bankim Chatterjee, the Scot of Bengal, swiftly made his way to the acknowledged headship of Bengali literature. To his popularity let Rabindranath bear witness. Then came B111K1 MS Banjardasan, taking the Bengali heart by storm. It was bad enough to have to wait till the next monthly number was out, but to be kept waiting further till my ciders had done with it was simply intolerable. Now he who will may swallow at a mouthful the whole of Chandrasekhar or Baslubriksha, but the process of Lon, JLLF. And anticipating, month AFER month. Of preading over the long interval the concentrated joy of each port arating, revolving every installment over and over in the mind while \\atching and waiting for the next. The culmination of satisfaction with unsatisfied craving, of burning curiosity with its appeasement, these long drawn-out delight of gong through the original serial none will ever taste again. Banjardasan was a brilliant transplanting of the Western miscellaneous monthly to Indian soil, and by it Bankim showed himself a pioneer in journalism no less than in fiction. Only Sudhana, the magazine afterwards associated with Rabindranath's MOT prolific period, has surpassed it in literary quality and popular appeal. Bankim was a man of genius and abundant versatile force, and had he always written on his best level of truth and achievement there could be no fear for his fame. Unfortunately, he drifted into the Neo-Hindu movement which pressed into service, for the rehabilitation of superstition and FLLY, My Reminiscences, pages 114, 131 SEQ, 202. My Reminiscences. p. 115. Bengal Review. Darsan means spectacle. Prolegomena 19 grotesque perversions of Western science and philosophy. Popular Hinduism contained no legend too silly, no social practice too degraded, to find support. Any fiction, however wild, was twisted into a proof that the discoveries of modern science were known to our forefathers. If a god careered the skies in a self-moving car, behold the 20th century aeroplane and steam-propelled car, both known thousands of years ago, in those wonderful primitive times. Though Bankim was never an extreme neo-Hindu, his name gave the movement an importance it could not have had otherwise, and his work became propaganda. Part of this movement was taken up by Ramakrishna Paramahansa, the ascetic, whom Max Muller has made familiar to Western readers, and by his disciple Vivekananda, whose advocacy gave reaction great vogue. The growing spirit of nationalism kept the tide running strongly. In no other family than that of the Tagores could all the varied impulses of the time have been felt so strongly and fully. These impulses had come from many men. Ram Mohan Roy had flung open doors, Desrosiers and others had thrown windows wide. Keshav came and intellectual and religious horizons were broadened. The tide of reaction had been set flowing by the Neo-Hindu school, in battle with whom the poet was to find his strength of polemical prose, his powers of sarcasm and ridicule. And poets and prose writers had established new forms, and given freedom to old ones. R. Rabindranath was fortunate in the date of his coming. Two early days. Rabindranath Tagore was born in Calcutta on the 6th of May, 1861. If he was fortunate in the time of his birth, when such a flowering season lay before his native tongue, in his family he had a gift which cannot be overestimated. He was born a Tagore. That is, he was born into the one family in which he could experience the national life at its very fullest and freest. He was born into that great rambling mansion at Churasunko, in the heart of Calcutta's teeming life. The house has grown as the whims or needs of successive Tagores have dictated, rambling and wandering round its courtyards, till it has become a tangle of building. Other houses may be thought of as having a soul of their own. This must have such an oversoul as belongs to the congregated life of ants and bees. If society be desired, it is always at hand. And the Hindu joint family system, when established on such a scale and with such opulence as here, sets about each member a mimic world, as vigorous as the world without and far closer. Yet for solitude, for the meditation of sage or the ecstatic absorption of child, there are corners and nooks and rooms. In the poet's reminiscences, we see a child watching the strange pageant of older folk and their solemn difficult ways. His father, the Maharshi, was usually absent, wandering abroad. The poet, the youngest of 7 sons, was left by his mother's death to the care of servants. Of these servants he has given us a humorous picture, not untouched with malice. In the history of India the regime of the slave dynasty was not a happy one. For most OT of childhood keep a peculiar bitterness to JJJ11 Ta Buffalo, S of life suppress the memory. KES, P24. / 5IL. Early days 21. Though they were keenly felt, one does not gather that the P.'s sorrows were unusual, in number or quality. His first experiences of school distressed him, but he escaped the ordinary routine of Indian school life, and his education was desultory. One thinks of Wordsworth's steadfast refusal to do any work other than as the muse commanded. He wrote his Ode to Duty, said a friend, and there was an end of that matter. Similarly Rabindranath declined to be educated. Even when his fame was long established, a Calcutta journal demurred to the suggestion that he should be an examiner in the matriculation of all examinations on the ground that he was not a Bengali scholar. J. I. R.St., the rambling house in Calcutta, the infinite leisure of days not troubled with much school. Then came gardens and river. An outbreak of infectious fever caused him to be taken outside the city, to a riverside residence. Here came a life fresher, more ecstatic than any before. Every day there was the ebb and flow of the tide on the Ganges, the various gait of so many different boats, the shifting of the shadows of the trees from west to east. And, over the fringe of shade patches of the woods on the opposite bank, the gush of golden lifeblood through the pierced breast of the evening sky. Some days would be cloudy from early morning, the opposite woods black. Black shadows moving over the river. Then with the rush would come the vociferous rain, blotting out the horizon, the dim line of the other bank taking its leave in tears, the river swelling with suppressed heavings, and the moist wind making free with the foliage of the trees overhead. He returned to Calcutta, having received the freedom of the fields. Henceforward, as stray lines from the Gita Govinda 8 or the C/Ud Messenger 9 fell on the child's hearing, imagination could take of the things that had been seen and by them conjure up the Sanskrit poet's picture. He had begun to write verse himself, and before long his father, who had been watching, as he watched all things, in that silent aloof fashion of his, took him into that wider world beyond Calcutta. He was now to know his native land, a land of very clear and lovely beauty. 1. My Reminiscences, pages 45-6, by Jayadeva, 12th century. Kalidasa's famous poem. 22. Rabindranath Tagore. There are two Bengals, nowise like each other. There is Bengal of the Ganges, a land of vast slow-moving rivers, great reed beds and mud banks, where the population is almost amphibious. Right in the heart of this region is Nadia, seat of the old Sen kingdom, a place which is Bengal of the Bengalis, legendary, haunted with memories of their vanished independence, sacred as a place where a god or hero was last shown on earth. Here you find the purest Bengali spoken. It is the place where poets have lived and sung. In after days, Rabindranath had a home in the very thicket of the reeds and rivers, at Chiliada. The influence of his sojourn here in earliest manhood cannot be overestimated, it is of the very texture or his poems and short stories. But it was the other Bengal to which he was introduced first. His father brought him for a short stay at Bolpur, the place which is forever associated with the poet's fame, because of the school which he established there. This Bengal is a dry uplifted country. The villages are scattered, and there are great spaces of jungle. The landscape of the jungle is of quiet loveliness, such as wins a man slowly yet forever. At first sight it is disappointing. There are few great trees, and absolutely nothing of the savage luxuriance of a Burmese rattan-chained sky-towering forest or of the ever-climbing dripping might of Himalayan woods. The one good timber tree, the sat, is pulled and cut away by the people for fuel. The mass of the jungle is a shrub, rarely 10 feet high, called kirchi, bright green, with milky juice and sweet white flowers. Intermixed with this are thorns, ziziphs and pink-blossomed mimosas. The soil is poor and hard. Where there is a tank, you have a tall simul, silk cotton tree, lifting in spring a scarlet head of trumpet-shaped flowers, or a wild mango. Often the soil cracks into nullas, fringed with crackling ziziph, or crowded with pallas trees. These last, and simul, furnish in spring the only one called in Bengali wild plum, a plant common in Palestine and Syria also. Early days 23 masses of wild flowers. Lokan Palit one told me that what he missed, on return from England to India, was our profusion. Our hedges crammed with shining beauty, our glades and meadows. After blackthorn, the ponds netted with crowfoot, the water violets and kingcups and lady smocks, the riot of gorse and may and wild rose, avenues of chestnut, the undergrowth of stitchworts, the sheets of primroses, violets, anemones, cowslips, and bluebells. And, when summer is ending, heaths and heather and bramble roses pleached deep. 9 Rabindranath himself has sp. to me of this variety in landscape, and also of the beauty of autumn foliage in England. Instead, in Bengal we have only simu and pa/s. Pothos flowers before the leaves come, twisted ungainly trees, holding up walls of leguminous, red flowers, which the Emperor Jahangir thought so beautiful that one cannot take one's eyes off them. After these, before the spring quite shrivels in the summer heats, nim and sil blossom. But their flowers, though exquisitely scented, make no show, being pale green-white and very small. But the jungle has a peaceful charm which even the great forests cannot surpass. At evening, seek out one of the rare groves of tall trees possibly preserved as a sacred grove, and with multitudes of crude clay horses round their bases, that the thukar may ride abroad or plunge deep into the whispering wilderness. Wait as the sun sinks, as the leaves awaken. Thr0 ug the trees you see the evening quietness touching all light. You are not alone, for many scores of eyes are watching you, but of them you catch no glimpse, unless a jackal slinks by or a tiny flock of screaming parrots races overhead. In the distance, the cattle are coming back to the village, the buffaloes are lazily and unwillingly climbing out of the tank. It is cow dust, for the Greek ox losing time. Or make your way to the open spaces, where only stunted one Rabindranath's friends and associate in youth and early manhood. Tennyson's dirge. Lord the same word as Tagore, as we have seen. A common Bengali name for evening. 24 Rabindranath Tagore's eyes ifs grow. Look around on the stretching plain, to TB horizon and its quiet lights. Seek out the jungle villages, the primitive life which finds a tank, a mango grove, and a few rice fields sufficient for its needs. And you will find the landscape by its very simplicity has taken your heart. In his Bangalakshmi one Rabindranath has personified this attractive land, in your fields, bayou, rivers, in your 1,000 homes set deep in mango groves, in our pastures whence the sound of milking rises, in shadow of the banyans, in the 12 temples beside Ganges, 0 ever gracious Lakshmi, oh Bengal my mother, you go about your endless tasks day and night with smiling face. In this world of men, you are unaware that your sons are idle. You alone. By the sleeping head you alone, 0 mother, my motherland, move wakeful, night and day, in your never-ending toil. Dawn by dawn you open flowers for worship. At noon, with your outspread skirt of leaves you ward off the sun. With night your rivers, singing the land to rest, enfold the tired hamlets with their 100 arms. Today, in this autumn noon, taking brief leisure in your sacred labor, you are sitting amid the trembling flowers in this still hour of murmuring doves, a silent joy shining on your lips. Your loving eyes dispense a broad pardon and blessing, with patient, peaceful looks. Gazing at that picture, off self-drowned and forgotten in love, gracious, calm, unspeaking, the poet bows high head and tears fill his eyes. These are idealized pictures, and in them, as in all passionate love of a land, human joys and sorrows have thrown a sanctifying light on the outward face of meadow and forest. But the land itself, where factory and mine have left it unspoiled, justifies its children's affection. Rabindranath's stay at Bhuvanpur was brief. His father, as Bas Ben said, was a great wanderer, whose deepest love was the Himalayas. In this, as in so much else, he showed a spirit akin to that of the ancient rishis among whom his countrymen's veneration placed him. His autobiography rejoices in the mighty hills, which cast a spell on his cool beyond any other. In Ka/Pana. I use my own translations throughout this book, except when otherwise stated. Early days 25 shortly before sunset I reached a peak called Sungrit. How and Ushan the day passed away El knew not. From this high peak I was enchanted with the beauty of 2 mountain ranges facing each other. The sunset, and darkness began gradually to steal across the earth. Still I sat alone on that peak. From afar the twinkling lights here and there upon the hills alone gave evidence of human habitation. It is very noticeable how little attraction nature in some of her grander and vaster manifestations has exercised over Rabindranath. No poet has felt more deeply and constantly the fascination of the great spaces of earth and sky, the boundless horizon and white lights of evening, the expanse of moonlight. To the way these have touched him with peace and the power of beauty 1,000 passages in his work bear witness. To this aspect of his poetry we are bound to return. But mountains touched his imagination comparatively little. He would not be Rabindranath if he had not laid them under contribution to furnish pictures. The great forest trees were found lustering closer, and from underneath their shade a little waterfall trickling out, like a little daughter of the hermitage playing at the feet of hoary sages wrapped in meditation. But that is not the language of the man on whose soul the great mountains have thrown their shadow, so that he loves them to the end. It has but to be placed beside the authentic utterance, to be seen for what it is, a restful image which the mind has gathered for itself outside itself. H0W. And when the day passed away I knew not. The tall cataract haunted me like a Zion. Rabindranath loved nature, but it was nature as she comes close to the habitations of men. His rivers are not left for long without a sail on their surfaces, they flow by meadow and pasture. His flowers and bees are in garden and orchard, his forest is at the hamlet's door. His fellow men were a necessity to him. Even so, it remains noteworthy how little of mountains we hear in his verse. Of rains and rivers, trees and clouds and moonlight and dawn, very much is spoken. But of mountains little. 1 IP 240-1. My Reminiscences, p. 92. Wordsworth 26. Rabindranath Tagore. He saw also much of the northwest country, carry \ng away a particular memory of the golden temple of the Sikhs at Amritsar. Already, though only a boy, he had seen far more of his native land than most sec in a lifetime. It was on his return home that he put into effect his magnificent powers of passive resistance, and won the first of many victories. He was sent to the Bengal Academy, and then to St. Xavier's. but his resolute refusal to be educated stood proof against authority and blandishment, and he was allowed to study at home. A friend writes, "You are quite right about mountains. As he once told me, up at Darjeeling, these massive screens of stone block TLEI, they are rigid and unchanging, they narrow down the freedom of pace. Light, free wind. Open space, are constantly recurring phrases in his work. But he has fine high point 1 Alayan poems in Naive Daya, Udranraga, and elsewhere. 3 Jivanjalia. The Vaishnava lyrics are the most popular poems of Bengal with the exception, perhaps, of Ramaprasad Sakta songs. Their poetical value is over-assessed, a fact which Rabindranath recognized in later years. But they enabled him to find his great lyrical gift, when he read them at the age of 15, and gratitude for this great service remained with him, through all his later moods of severity of judgment. In conversation he outlined his 2 debts to them. "I found in the Vaishnava poet's lyrical movement, and images startling and new. Neither Hemchandra Banerjee nor Nabinchandra Sen," he said, "produced any new lyrical forms, their meters were experimental and stiff. Thought of them sometimes seemed to make him angry. I have no patience with these folk. They introduced nothing new, their forms were the same old monotonous meter. But in the Vaishnava poets, language was fluid, verse could sing. I am so grateful that I got to know them when I did. They gave me form. They make many experiments in meter. And then there was the boldness of their imagery. Take this from Ananta Das, eyes starting like birds about to fly. 1 The boy poet read also the story of Chatterton, which exercised its natural fascination. And he made himself a poetical incarnation in a supposed old Vaishnava singer, Bhanu Singh Lion of the Sun, with a play frequent in his verse, on the meaning of his name Ruby. 11 He has told gleefully how these Bhai Singh songs, first published in Bharti, 1877, deceived Vaishnava enthusiasts, and how one this seems to be from Lok Endas, not Ananta Das. The Sun. A periodical. Bharti is a name of Sarasvati, goddess of learning and poetry. 2728 Rabindranath Tagore Nishakant Chatterjee was awarded a German PhD for a treatise on ancient Vaishnava poetry, in which Bhanu Singh was lauded. Rabindranath's later judgment on the series Ma.Y. be quoted, any attempt to test Bhanu Singh's poetry by its ring would have shown up the base metal. It had none of the ravishing melody of our ancient pipes, but only the tinkle of a modern, foreign barrel organ. 1 The Bhanu Singh lyrics sort and arrange, in as many ways as the poet can think of, the old themes of the Vaishnava singers, the unkindness and neglect of Krishna, the sorrow of deserted Radha, flowers, flutes in the forest, the woman going to tryst in heavy rain. All the time Bhanu Singh chides or consoles or advises the disconsolate Radha. This town-bred boy poet manages to convey a distinct freshness, as of winds in a wood, and he has beautiful touches. Like dream lightning on the clouds of sleep, Radha's laughter glitters. His literary career is generally considered to have begun with the Bhanu Singh poems, but much scattered prose and verse had appeared earlier, especially in periodicals. In 1875 and 1876 an essay, World Charming Intelligence, and 2 poems, Wild Flowers and Lamentation, appeared in Guy E. Nanker's Sprouting Intelligence, a magazine. Wild Flowers is a story in 6 parts. It appeared in book form in 1879 in 8 cantos, a total of 1,582 lines, not one of which was ever reprinted by the poet. In 1877, A Poet's Story, a fragment of 1,185 lines, appeared in Bharti. This was his first work to be published in book form, a friend printing it in 1878. Its first part is a highly idealized picture of his happy childhood, as the playmate of nature. Later, become a man, aged 15 or so, he thinks by night of poetry, by day of science. This dualism of his thought thus early exhibited. It is fanciful, with plenty of easy personification, nymphs and goddesses, my reminiscences, p. 139. It was written much earlier, when he was 13. Or, Juvenilia night the poet queen would sing her magic spells, till everything one mysteriousness would seem. All the world a glamorous dream. The day the south wind sighed, the bowers at her breath burst out in flowers, that day the bird choirs sang, that day spring's Lakshmi went her laughing way. 29 This is enchanted country, and all young poets have lived in it. But not all young poets have had access to a sublimer realm which this boy poet knew, when with clash and shout the storm rocked the mountain's steadfast form, when dense clouds before the blow scud, frantic, to and fro, lone on mountain peaks I've been, and the mighty ruin seen. 1,000 thunderbolts have sped with hideous laughter o'er my head, beneath my feet huge boulders leapt and roaring down the valleys swept, enormous snowfields left their place, tumbled and hurled to the peak's base. Better still is this vision of the midnight heavens, in the wide sky didst thou, primeval mother, spread time's mighty plume. Far o'er my head, those countless worlds there shepherding under the shadow of thy wing. After this, his poetry came out regularly in Bharti. Rudrachanda, his earliest play, appeared as a book in 1881. And has not been reprinted, except for 2 songs. It consists of 800 lines, in 14 scenes. The affectionate dedication to his elder brother Jyotirindranath tells us that it was written before he left for England, when he was 16 or 17. Goddess of fortune and beauty. You may have a household Lakshmi, a Bengal Lakshmi, a forest Lakshmi. 30 Rabindranath Tagore The Piece I Pour melodrama. Pity, a novel, came out serially, a very indifferent imitation of Bankim, and not even interesting. 1 Then there were stories in blank verse, Gatha garlands or songs influenced by Scott's metrical romances. I do not even remember what they were about, the poet told me. My sister has a book called Gatha. I suppose it must be these. We find many scattered pieces, chiefly lyrical, a.m. Morning song, even song, woman, the first glimpse, the love of a nymph, lilty, 9, an untranslatable word which we shall meet later. Thcne themes are orthodox, and the titles do not excite surprise in those familiar with poetical beginnings. More distinctively Indian are Agamoni the Coming, 1877, Bharti, a poem celebrating the coming of the goddess Uma to her father's home, Salutation to India, 1880, Bharti, and Kali in Shiva's Heart, 1877–1880, Bharti. But it is the prose of this period which shows best how alert and eager his mind was. JN 1877, he published in Bharti an essay, Tlze Hope and Despair of Bengalis, in which a master theme of his whole life appears, the necessity of East and West to each other. Europe's intellectual freedom and India's conservatism, Europe's arts and India's philosophy, Europe's independence and India's mental tranquility, must be molded together, this boy insists, ere a better civilization can be made. In the same year, he turns his attention to the connection between language and character, between literary and moral progress, and says a race cannot improve unless its language docks. In 1878, one number of Bharti contains articles on the Saxons and Anglo-Saxon literature, Petrarch and Laura, Dante and his poetry, and on Goethe, all by Rabindranath. A sufficiently comprehensive sweep of interest, however hand and slight the knowledge, for a boy of 17. In 1879, Bharti has articles on the Normans and Anglo-Norman literature, and on Chatterton. Before he was 18, he had published nearly 7,000 lines of verse, and a great quantity of prose. From my quotations, the readers will have noted how like Mahalanobis. Play or drama juvenilia 31 European, and especially English, poetry his early poems are. His considerable acquaintance with English poetry was great gain. The Sanskrit poets gave him a sound body of traditional Indian art, to keep his own work essentially vernacular. But the English Sarasvati may fairly claim from her Bengali sister a good deal of the credit of his training. Some of this, at any rate, came in England itself, for which he sailed in the autumn of 1877, returning 14 months later. About this visit to England he has written, with a humor that is half bitterness, in his reminiscences. He went to school at Brighton, where he was kindly treated by the other boys. He saw for the first time the earth white with snow. He left school, and went into dreary lodgings in a London square. He found a pleasanter home with a doctor, and he attended lectures on English literature at University College. I heard him speak of the pleasure which came from reading the Religio Medici with Henry Morley. Also, I read Coriolanus with Hitton, and greatly enjoyed it. His reading was beautiful. And Antony and Cleopatra, which I liked very much. A class fellow was the brilliant and unfortunate Loken Pallet, afterwards in the Indian civil service. A section of the reminiscences is devoted to this friendship. Loken Pallet jives, with all who ever met him, for his abounding enthusiasm, his keen joyousness. Like an arrow meeting a crosswind, he himself fell short. But his appreciation and understanding stimulated his friend. Rabindranath returned to India apparently bringing little from his visit but some memories by no means all pleasant, and a knowledge of some plays of Shakespeare and the Religio Medici. Letters of a Traveller to Europe appeared in Bardi, 1879–1880, and were reissued as a book, still in print. They criticize the conduct of English society ladies, and express genuine though patronizing admiration of the ladies of what used to be called the middle classes. Rabindranath thought more favorably of the social morality of the West, 32 Rabindranath Tagore as compared with that of the East, than his eldest brother Dvijendranath, editor of Bardi, liked, and the brothers had a sharp controversy in that magazine. He completed The Broken Heart, a lyrical drama begun in England, a very sentimental piece. It was published, and a Hill potentate sent his chief minister to the author to express his admiration. Today the poem has fallen into a gulf of oblivion, whence Rabindranath has refrained from rescuing it, except for a few songs and short passages. It is haunted by one of his favorite plots. A poet does not realize that he loves a girl till he has deserted her. He wanders from land to land, and returns to find her dying. His English stay further manifested its influence in underscore the genius of Almaiki, a musical drama. Music was always a main passion with him. He was a fertile composer of tunes as of songs, and from his brain meaning and melody often sprang together, and while in England he had paid some attention to Western music. The tunes of the genius of Almaiki are half Indian, half European, inspired by Moore's Irish melodies. The piece keeps a place in his collected works. It is prefaced by 3 sentences deprecating any attempt to read it as a poem, apart from its music. It treats crudely in a multitude of tiny scenes, the Indian legend of the robber chief who became the author of the Ramayana. Valmiki, members of his band, Sarasvati first disguised as a little girl whom the robber chieftain rescues from his followers, who wish to sacrifice her to Kali. And then apparent in her proper majesty, to reward her savior with the gift of poetry, and Lakshmi rush in and out of the play, in a fashion which recalls nothing so much as rabbits popping in and out of their burrows on a warm summer evening. There is a chorus of wood nymphs, who open the play with a lament which recalls Tennyson's infelicitous introduction of Titania 1, if it be she, but oh, how fallen, how changed, from the imperious. 1 Act 2, Scene 2. Rabindranath told me that the resemblances to English folklore in his play were accidental. Juvenilu 33 Empress of a Midsummer Night's Dream, from the Foresters. My soul weeps. It cannot bear it, cannot bear it. Our belle qved woods are a burning ground. The robber bands have come and destroy all peace. With terror the whole landscape is trembling. The forest is troubled, the WMD weeps, the deer start, the birds sing no longer. The green companies of trees swim in blood, the stones burst asunder at the voices of piteous wailing. Goddess Durga, see. These woods are fear-stricken, restrain these lawless men, and give us peace. Despite the accusations of this chorus, the robber bands seem pretty harmless folk. They bluster a good deal, and make a great show of being very violent. But the only person they seem to intend harm against is the disguised Sarasvati, and their chief does not have any real difficulty in checking them here. There is dignity in the long speech with which Sarasvati closes the play: listening to thine immortal song, the sun, child, on the world's last day his course shall run. Long as the sun endure, long as the moon, thou to thy harp shalt sound thy mighty tune. First and chief of poets. Had Rabindranath died at Chatterton's age, a Bengali one Dr. Johnson might have used similar words of his abundance. Lowell's woes on Keats recur to memory. Happy the young poet who has the saving fault of exuberance, if he have also the shaping faculty that sooner or later will amend it. Prose and verse flowed in equal volume, as they flowed ever after, his vein resembling that waterfall, in whose praise his mind spontaneously found her true freedom, as he has told us. 9 of this early period his Sisabkal, as he has styled it, or childhood, he selected 47 poems or parts of poems, under the title of Kaisarak Juvenilia, in the first collected edition of his poems in 1896. These, with the exception one Dr. Johnson thought it astonishing that the whelp, the boy Chatterton, could have written so much. My Reminiscences, p. 217. 334 Rablndrnath Tagore of 20 Bhanu Singh songs, are all he cared to preserve. More than 11,000 lines of verse published before H was 20 he never reprinted. He was sufficiently known as a rising poet. For a selection of his earliest verse to be issued in 1881, as Sisa Sanjit Songs of Childhood. The piece show him in possession of a device which he was to use far more than most poets, that of repetition and the refrain. The meters are easily handled and are musical. The subjects are not as fresh as the young poet perhaps thought them. There are gloomy pieces, full of the disillusionment which is often the bitter experience of poets not 3/4 through their teens. There are love poems, there are roems which celebrate dawn and evening and cry for rest, there are poems of journeying. Many are on flowers, one of the earliest celebrating that much praised flower, the rose, rose maiden, ah, my rose maiden. Lift your face, lift your fse, and light the blossomy grove. Why so shy? Why so shy? Hiding close your face among your leaves, why so shy? He narrowly escaped a second English visit. When he was about 20, he sailed for England, to qualify for the bar. But Sarasvati was watchful, and frustrated this new attempt to educate her son. His companion, an older nephew, suffered so much from seasickness that he turned back at Madras. The poet, possibly seasick also, accompanied him, doubting of the parental reception which awaited him. The Maharshi, perhaps never very enthusiastic as to his future as a pleader, merely said, "So you have come back. All right, you may stay. For the heart wilderness there is a vast forest named the heart, limitless all side sheer I lost my way." Morning Songs. When The Broken Heart was written, Rabindranath was well launched upon those stormy seas which begin a poet's career, the period of his introspective sorrows, of his journeyings, not home to his habitual self, but to a false self, full of mornings, sensitive and solitary. Keats has said, "The imagination of a boy is healthy, and the mature imagination of a man is healthy, but there is a space of life between, in which the soul is in a ferment, the character undecided, the ambition thick-sighted. That space of life between is the mood of evening songs." This, like each successive book of verse, for the next half-dozen years, represents a big stride forward, in style and mastery of material, from The Broken Heart and the genius of Valmiki. But in its lyrics everything draws its hues from the poet's mind. The atmosphere is somber to monotony. Thought is choked by vague emotion, or shines dimly through the mists of imaginary feeling. Dr. Seal writes of their intense egoistic subjectivity, untouched by any of the real interests of life or society. Yet the poems, in the expressive simplicity of their diction, were in advance of anything then being written. The whole book points to his later achievement, and has an importance out of proportion to its merits. He is feeling his way, and has no sureness of touch in meter, no firm control of dot cadence. But already there is no mistaking the master of preface to Endymion. Seal, New Essays in Criticism, p. 76. 336 Rabindranath Tagore Language, the magician who can call up cloud after cloud, of rich imagery. The very first piece shows alike the defects of outlook and theme, and the wealth of fancy. Shortly after its publication, the poet was invited to a marriage feast at Rameshchandra Dutta's house. As he came up, people were garlanding the Scot of Bengal, Bankim Chatterjee. Putting by the tribute, Bankim said, "You must garland him. Have you not read his Jane Vacatio 11? In the manner of the time, he looked about for an English comparison, and added, "It is better than Collins's Ode to Evening. Spirit of evening. Sitting alone beneath the limitless sky. Taking the world in your lap, shaking out your disheveled locks, bending above it your face full of love, full or love-iness. Very softly, ah. What words are you whispering, what songs are you crooning to yourself, as you look into the world's face? Day after day I have heard those words, yet today I do not understand them. Day after day have heard those songs, yet I have not learnt them. Only heavy sleep weighs down my lids, a load of thought oppresses my soul. Yet deep within my heart, deeper, deeper still, in its very core, there sounds a voice which answers to your voice. Some world-forsaking exile from I know not what land is singing in unison with you. Spirit of evening, 'tis as if some neighbor, a dweller in your own land, a brother almost, has lost his way on this alien earth of my soul where he wanders weeping. Hearing your voice, it is as if he heard the songs of his own land, and suddenly from far away he responds, he opens his heart. All around he looks, as if seeking you he wanders, restless and eager. How many memories of ancient converse, how many lost songs, how many sighs of his spirit. Zero evening. Have lost themselves in this darkness of yours. Their floating hosts fill your darkness, they wander in the calm heart of eternity, like broken fragments of a shattered world. Sit at your feet, on this river's brink, and the flock about me surceing around me. Evening Songs bears the mark of its tentative end. Transitional character on every poem. All is experimental, both thought and meter. Dr. Seal speaks of monade-like visitings, which fill the twilight of a young poet's mind, the heart wilderness 37 with ghostly wings. But the monades, after all, were creatures of airy considerable vigor. The denizens of the world of evening songs are hardly ever ghosts. The poet's tricks are simple, and in a very few pages we know that we are not ignorant of his devices. There is the repeated striking zero of one note, till the mind is jaded or maddened, as by coppersmith or brain fever bird the sweltering heats. Among poets with any claim to greatness only Swinburne has such a vocabulary of repetitions as is Rabindranath's silence, soul, heart, song, and speech, lonely, dense, deep, the skirts of the sky or the forest, tears, sighs, stars, bride, caresses, love, death. These are the words with which he weaves and reweaves an endless garland of sad pretty fancies. There are the same images. The weeping traveler of invocation is to be a nuisance in the poet's forests for many a day. These faults flaw not evening songs alone, but the books of the next half-decade. It is the more curious that his genius should have stagnated in this respect, when in every other way his progress was so rapid. Even when he was world famous, though he had enlarged his range of illustration, he had not cast away his besetting risk of monotony and had a tendency, when inspiration failed, to fall back on certain lines of thought and language, and the old tropes reappeared, tears, stars, moonlight. From first to last, he is an extremely mannered poet, as well as a most unique one. And the sorrow of evening songs is as unreal as ever filled a young poet's mind, in love with its own opening beauty. No muse weeps on so little provocation as the Bengali muse. And though Rabindranath's muse offends less than the general, she is tearful enough. It is a nation that enjoys being thoroughly miserable. But the essential thing to remember is that this boy was a pioneer. Bengali lyrical verse was in the making. A boy of 18 was striking out new paths, cutting channels for thought to flow in. In evening songs I first felt my own freedom from bondage of imitation of other poets. Unless you know the history of our lyric, you cannot understand how audacious it was to break the conventions of form and 38 Rabindranath Tagore diction. You may call the meters of evening songs rhymed ver-ibra. I felt great delight, and realized my freedom at once. The reader today must admire the extraordinary freedom of the verse, formless freedom too often, but all this looseness is going to be shaken together presently, the meters are to become knit and strong. Further, this was the first genuine romantic movement in Bengali. The book was defiantly lyrical, almost morbidly personal. 9 In Mohit Chandra Sen's edition of the poet's works in 1903, when poems were grouped by similarity of character and not chronologically, evening songs and earlier PTS were put under the heading Heart Wilderness. The title was APT. The book falls into two fairly clearly marked divisions. The earlier poems are the more valuable, their thinness and unreality being more than redeemed by zest and by genuine, sometimes exquisite, beauty of detail. The Akant group are more marred by conceits, and show the poet moving about, or rather floundering, in worlds not realized. All the poems suffer from his trick of parallelism, one of the laziest and most constant of his mannerisms. Here the parallelism I see, between sing and say. All is gone. There is nothing left to say. All is gone. There is nothing left to sing. In the later poems, catalogues of the raggedest kind, often occur whole passages of this sort: compassion is the wind of the world, compassion is the sun and moon and stars, compassion is the dew of the world, compassion is the rain of the world. Like the stream of a mother's love, as this Ganges which is flowing, gently to creeks and nooks of its banks whispering and sighing, so this pure compassion pours on the heart, appeasing the world's thirst, it sings songs in a compassionate voice. One conversation. Mahalanobis. The heart wilderness. Compassion is the shadow of the forest, compassion is the dawn's rays, compassion is a mother's eyes, compassion is the lover's mind. 139. It may be said once for all that when in my versions of his early poems a word is repeated as above, where compassion sings in a compassionate voice, the repetition is there because in the Bengali someday a Bengali style will forbid the use of a word too close upon its previous use. But the literary conscience is not sensitive on the point yet. This was the period when Shelley's hymn to intellectual Beat was the perfect expression of his mind, when he could feel that poem as if written for him, or by him. 2. Since every prominent Bengali writer was equated with some English one, he was the Bengali Shelley, and that erratic entrancing spirit was the chief foreign influence on his work. In later years, like other poets, he lost this idol. I have long outgrown that enthusiasm, he once told me. Yet even in later years he recurred fondly to the hymn to intellectual beauty. Its influence crops up continually in his early work, so often that I shall indicate it only once or twice, leaving the reader, as a rule, to notice it for himself. When he wrote evening songs, his mind resembled Shelley's in many things, in his emotional me. Airy, his mythopchia, his personified abstract ions. But these last are bloodless in the extreme, resembling far more the attendants in the death chamber of Adonais, desires and adorations, winged persuasions and veiled destinies, splendors and glooms, and glimmering incarnations of hopes and fears, and twilight fantasies. And sorrow, with her family of sighs, and pleasure, blind with tears, led by the gleam of her own dying smile instead of eyes, came, and slow pomp. The moving pomp might seem like pageantry of mist on an autumnal stream. This, and many similar passages, were omitted in the poet's one Evi's text later. Conversation. 40. Rabindranath Tagore. Then the figures of the west windowed the blue Mediterranean, I yuled by the coil of his crystalline streams, or the approachier.g storm, with its locks uplifted like the hair of a fierce maid. Yet if we take evening songs at their best, how beautiful in their languorous fashion these poems are. One of the finest songs is Evening, prophetic title and theme. A heady there is his power of making an atmosphere. The poem has all the shortcomings of evening songs, yet it transcends Tebum triumphantly. There is no depth of feeling has not begun. It is all abstractions, and the poet is obsessed by the image of a mother and child. But out of this tenuous srnff he makes a lullaby. The empty trace, winding their cunning monotonous coils, suggest the weaving of spells, the chorus seeming to wave arms in incantation. The last paragraph contains the Finti draft, or 011e of th0 prettiest things in his English Gitanjali, 1 come, evening, gently, gently, come. Carrying on your arm your basket of dreams. Humming your spells, weave your garland of dreams. Crown my head with them. Caress me with your loved hand. The river, heavy with sleep, will sing murmurs a half-chant woven in sleep, the cicadas will strike up their monotonous tune. And the poem ends with the filmy dreamy atmosphere he loves so well. It is like Indian music, plaintive and simple, on one strain. Harmony is not used, though later he is to use it magnificently. So he sketches a mood of desolation, in which life seems empty. In the heart's monoe he rebukes himself for this one song of shadowy sorrow that he sings. It hot, some lines on a dove, a shadow dove, of course, on my heart's tumble. Foundations, in the still noon, a dove sits sole, singing its soul tune none knows why it sings. 1 Number 67. The heart wilderness hearing its grieved plaint, silence grows with weeping faint, and Riho wails, alas! Alas! Heart! Then nothing have you learnt, but this one song alone. Among the 1000 musics of the world, ever this unmown. None will kirken to your song. What matter if they do not? Or, hearing, none will weep. What Q1 atra if they do not? Give over, soul. So long I cannot bear lo hear it this same song. This same song. 41 The Wail of Happiness, an exki. I piece, is one of those .e. which represent the very real achievement of evening songs. Mu 1 hght his real muse inspires him, and floods his dream with beauty, every gentle sight and sound are blended. In one perfect invocation. Happiness sighs, shutting her drowsed eyes, sweet is this moonlight, sweet. A flute plays, far, far away. A burden of gentle sleep has touched night's laughing lids. Waves gently swell on Lhi river, gently on the trees leaves quiver. Loss of rhe ego stands out by a certain objectivity, the thought plainly beginning to pass away from this unreal world. Images are bolder, clearer in outline. In it he uses his famous forest 5 milk. 1 His early joy has vanished, and he is entangled in a dark wood, where he has lost his way. He has not seen his old self for many days. That which was has vanished, lost in a jungle of subjectivity. He cries out to God for light and air. Thus, Evening Songs, finishes for loss of the ego is one of its very latest poems, as well as one of the last 3 in the printed order, with a piece of accurate diagnosis and self-criticism that promise well for the young poet's future. Readers will remember the opening of Dante's Divine Comedy. 5 Emergence, dramatic beginnings. TTTE space I have given to evening songs is justified by Rabindranath's own words. 1 To me this is the most memorable period of my poetic career. For the first time I had come to write what I really meant, just according to my pleasure. But there can be no question of the immense advance in merit of Horning songs, the first throwing forth of my inner self. 1 Outwards, in the morning songs I celebrated the sudden open me of a, late. The poems were born out of a new experience, of sheer joy in the world and of union with it. The awakening of the waterfall gushed forth and coursed on like a veritable cascade. 9 This is the experience out of which it sprang. One morning I happened to be standing on the veranda. The sun was just eyeing through the leafy tops of those trees. As I continued to gaze, all of a sudden a covering seemed to fall away from my eyes. And I found the world bathed in a wonderful radiance, with waves of beauty and joy swelling on every side. This radiance pierced in a moment through the folds of sadness and despondency which had accumulated over my heart, and flooded it with this universal light. Morning Songs shows the rising of his healthier intellectual self above the mists, the miasma, almost of self-obsession, the vague miseries of adolescence. The book has its own faults of overemphasis, of dwelling on his newfound freedom with a convert's earnestness, till the aggressive assertions of mental robustness and of Catholic sympathy take on a monotony of their own. Their zest, however, my reminiscences, p. 203. Ibid. p. 228. Ibid. p. 217. 42 Ibid. p. 203. Emergence, dramatic beginnings. 43 makes them endurable when the languors of evening songs pall, and the poems witness to a remarkably quick escape from that slough of despond which seems to engulf almost all poets early in their race. In this fact lies the immortal ce of Morning Songs. The poems face his future and resolutely forsake his past. Their meter, also, is firm and sure, after evening songs. Repetitions are fewer, and his mannerisms are temporarily in some abeyance. While almost every strain to be found in his poetical range in later days has its preluding note struck in some poem. The Awakening of the Waterfall is the key poem of Morning Songs. The sudden freedom which has come to him finds clamorous expression in the fierce vigor of its movement, the passionate happiness of its pictures. The mountain trembles, the stones in vast scrisses clattering pour, the waters, swelling and foaming, in anger and tumult roar. In their mighty exultation they would rend the mountain asunder, mad with the morning's rays, through earth they would crash and thunder. And I one will pour of compassion a river, the prisons of stones I will break, will deliver, I dash. I'll flood the earth, and, with rapture mad, pour music glad. With dishevelled tray scs, and gathering flow 1s, with rainbow wings widespread, through the hours I shall run and scatter my laughter bright and the dear sunlight. I shall run from peak to peak, and from hill to hill my leaping waters spill, loudly shall laugh and with claps keep time to my own steps chime. The poem is remarkable for its natural beauty. An example of this is its picture of the frozen cave, into which a ray of light has pierced, melting its coldness, causing the waters to gather drop by drop. A Himalayan picture, mossy and chill. The piece is a favorite with his countrymen, and 44 Ra.B. /Ndrtfnath Tagore marks a most important point in his history. In passing, it may be noted that its symbolism recurs throughout his work. No poet Bass more constantly worked over and over again his favorite lines of thought. Here we find him tracing the course of the river rising in that cave, till it blends with the sea. It flows through cultivation, *Reen are my two banks, where flowers grow in ranks. Thu. VCS, in crafty play, kiss them, and run away, and ends in infinity, in perfect cleansing rest. In this aspect the poem is the first sketch of what he filled in, a dozen years later, in the river. But even that poem was only an intermediate stage, in the evolution of the simile, of a stream and a life. His poetry did not forget the old theme, but found new ways of filling it with ever-deepening richness, as in the LCHC/1 Hamadi River, which I saw in manuscript in 1921, the morning it was written. 3 pieces show his strong interest in modern science. He missed always that the West's achievements in the conquest of natural forces have been stupendous, and that it is certain ruin for his countrymen to neglect them. The story of the earth, the record of physical science, fascinated him. So even in Morning Songs, in the Bengal of 40 years ago, we find him, in the 2 complementary poems, Endless Life and Endless Death, giving us close reasoning, and verse as scientific in outlook and illustration as anything that was being written anywhere. Both poems, despite the latter's title, leaned to the side of optimism, for he was always impressed by the endless succession of new births, by the indestructibility of matter and of life. He protests again the excessive cult of that flitting experience which we call the present. What is present do you call that life? It is merely flying moments. On its back is the dead weight of the past, and IKNW not where it will finish. The third of these kindred pieces, creation, conservation, and destruction, is much the greatest. It has none of the emergence, dramatic beginnings 45 prosaic enumeration of the other two, but opens with a marvelous synthesis of the two most impressive pictures of the world's beginning known to him, that of modern science and that of Indian mythology. A profound philosophical understanding welds the whole. Thought is lit up by imagination, and we have an unforgettable picture of the vast wastes, and of primal energies at work. Brahma the Creator is meditating amid the huge formless emptiness, while the darkness waits in fear for his awakening. All life to be is folded up within his heart. He opens his eyes, and utters the great hymn of creation. From his four mouths the errative words fly forth, to all quarters, on their endless travels, age after age. Space is filled with whirling fire fountains, and burning nebula, shaping themselves to become worlds. Vishnu, the preserver, takes up his conch, and blows. Order comes into being, lives and families replenish the earth. Vishnu